I'm not going to give super fancy intros because they are going to do that themselves in their presentations, but we're so incredibly lucky to have Steve Lambert and our very own new anchor of this year, Terry Marshall, presenting on behalf of the theme of Designing for Creative Activism. Steve Lambert is an artist. He is someone who's in our extended community by affiliation and by proxy, and today with us. He's the founder of the Center for Artistic Activism, which I think for many of us who are in the program and adjacent to the program acts as a possible shape or possible answer to so many of the questions that we have been throwing around how to participate collectively, how to bring change in a moment where we desperately need it, election results aside, and how to use creative work and the art practice as vehicles for that change. So wonderful to have you here with us, Steve and Terry Marshall, co-founder of Intelligent Mischief. If you haven't scoped their work, please scope their work. They're doing incredible work to help understand or help empower Black imagination and radical imagination among creators and in culture, and to really shift the way that we think about what is possible in collective cultural and Black futures. Super lucky to have you with us presenting. Terry is also an alum of the Center for Artistic Activism, so lots of shared ties and family bonds going on in the background.
He's also a board member, so he's technically, as he likes to say, he's technically my boss.
Terry is Steve's boss.
Technically.
And for the next several minutes, as he introduces himself, Steve is going to be all of our boss. So I will now turn it over to you, Steve.
Well, so we are going to introduce ourselves. I guess I'll go first. So the Center for Artistic Activism is a lot of people. I'm one of the founders. Another founder is Stephen Duncombe. And another director is a woman named Rebecca Bray. Terry is an alumni. Terry is on our board. And then we have different people that kind of collaborate and participate. So we grow and during different projects. We have trainers in West Africa and the Balkans right now that we're working with and have been working with for several years. We are a 501(c) nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 11 years. We started as a kind of a research project, and both the other Steve and I had a lot of hope for what artistic activism could do, but at the same time, a little bit of doubt and skepticism. We had worked in it and we're like, this seems to work, but we don't want to put a ton of energy into this if we just believe that it works and it doesn't actually have impact. So we want to know that it has impact, and we want to look at all the different ways that it can. And so it started as that research and then turned into a training program. At this point, we've worked in 15 different countries on 4 continents, sometimes alongside Terry, and working on all kinds of issues. And then we'll work sometimes in depth with an organization on things like public health or anti-corruption, most recently voter suppression, and train local people on how to then teach other people so that movement grows against corruption or for public health goals. So that's kind of what we do, and I can give some examples of what that looks like later. But Terry, do you want to say a bit about Intelligent Mischief?
Oh man, I was gonna let this part slide. I was like, yeah, you don't need to know about me. Came here to watch.
We do.
I'll say a little bit. Intelligent Mischief, like Terry Marshall, founder, co-founder of Intelligent Mischief. I created Intelligent Mischief, I guess officially 2013. I came out of about over 20 years organizing, like grassroots organizing, labor organizing, political prison organizing, youth organizing, anti-police brutality organizing. And I always incorporate culture, arts and culture, the things I did. And it wasn't something I was trained in. It was just something I always felt a part, and always felt that it was better organizing felt better when you included arts and culture. I couldn't understand some stale organizing that would happen, not naming names. But so I finally come to a point where I wanted to create something that I thought what the movement needed was a lab, a space where people could actually just experiment. And then my experience at Occupy Wall Street in New York was seeing that as a giant lab where people could come and go and experiment, collaborate or not. Almost was like a model for when I created Intelligent Mischief. Yeah, we started as mostly consulting grassroots groups on how to deploy creativity and include arts and culture activism. We've evolved now more to, we call ourselves a creative studio / design studio. We use design thinking. We use what we call creative activism to develop transformative experiences for folks. So that could be from an action, that could be a story world that we build, that could be experiential activation that we develop and create with folks and through multiple mediums. And that's our primary work. Stop there.
Do you want to talk about the historical examples and imagination and all that?
All right. See, this is your way of tricking me to go first. I saw that.
Yes.
I saw the wheels turning when the pre-meeting. I'm gonna let everyone know the truth. So I mean, I was gonna start with historical examples, and then I thought, well, I'll just talk about myself, and show examples of work that we did, and then throw in like who we look after. So I guess I'll share my screen. Because there's a video I want people to show. Actually, no, I'll tell a little bit of story. Same time, around shortly after we created Intelligent Mischief, unfortunately, Trayvon Martin was murdered in Florida. And I, like many other people, we see the result now, really, a movement sparking off. That I was like, it wasn't when Zimmerman, his murderer, was let off. I was more, I want to say shocked. Yeah, it was more like, wow, this was like, just crazy. It wasn't, a seasoned organizer by then. So I'm not like, I can't believe the system did this, but there was just kind of like a horror to it for me personally. As at 15, I was almost shot by a police officer. So, it's like a never ending story that you hear. So but it made me look at this thing where I realized that the jury, one jury person has said that they kept what kept getting them was like this, like they kept referring to Trayvon's body, and that just really captured me. And I was like, like there's this thing about the Black body and like the scariness of the Black body. And I had wrote this Facebook post or something about like, how they saw Zimmerman, they didn't think Trayvon, this is what the juror has said in an interview. They didn't think Trayvon did anything wrong. They thought Zimmerman was just a good guy who was looking out for people like them. So it was like Trayvon became collateral damage, right? To me, that was saying any Black body is just too dangerous to just be leaving around unattended. You have to take care of it. It's like a zombie, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I kept running with that idea. And then I thought of, there was a book called Survival Guide for Zombies, like in the world, the zombies and stuff like that, the zombie apocalypse. And I was like, oh, what if I change that around to a survival guide for Black bodies, right? And so these Black people are viewed as the zombies, but they're the ones that need the protection. They needed the in this crazy world, right? So we created a project called Black Body Survival Guide. And I will share my screen. I remember the techniques I was taught. And this is something that came out of it.
What is that right there?
A hotness.
A hot
Mess of hotness.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know what they actually doing right there.
I don't get it. Jesus help us all.
Now,
Stop. Don't turn off your device. Stop. Don't turn off your device. We are in control of your media. Black bodies are under attack. Every day we hear stories about the attack on Black lives. This is not a war. This is a culling. Your options are imprisonment, death, or survival. If you choose survival, you will need help. You must acquire a copy of the Black Body Survival Guide. Chrisland, can you come downstairs, please? Mom, I'm working on Black Freedom. What is the Black Body Survival Guide, you ask? It is a key to a door. Tips and tricks to survive the stark reality. Who is the Black Body Survival Guide for? Anyone who believes in the survival of the Black body and the freedom of the people who wish to be. We are out of time. If you wish to be the architect of your own liberation, join us in supporting the Black Body Survival Guide. Don't wait. Cut the connection.
Oh, am I doing this correctly? I'll stop the share right there. I was just messing up. I probably talked very long anyway. So that's a video we had made, but it was part of a larger project called the Black Body Survival Multimedia Project. What we was producing was a surrealist guide, right, with the assumption that we followed the guidelines, we followed the logic of the police and white vigilantes that are murdering innocent Black people, right? It was always the Black person's fault. It was always the victim's fault. So we was like, oh, well, there must be some new rules that Black people just don't know about. And we should really help them by writing those rules and showing it to them. So we did these workshops where we sourced the rules from folks from in Boston, Detroit, New York, Oakland, I think also. And we came with these totally ridiculous tips, right? Because we also made a t-shirt that said, when reality gets absurd, it's time to get surreal, right? And we figured the only way you couldn't tackle this problem so intrinsic and complex in society, right? And a lot of ways, it's not complex. You should just stop shooting innocent Black people. But in our society, how systems are run, right? It's so deeply entrenched, you could no longer confront this just in a direct way. We wanted to reverse the narrative. We wanted to expose the racism that was so intrinsic in it. And so we look towards surrealism, which is like historically was like Afro-surrealists were more of the original surrealists that were coming through in the movement. And we looked at that as inspiration and source. And we had tips such as we was like, oh, how do you make white privilege real? How do you concretize, materialize white privilege? And we created a card for white allies. And the card said, we printed out, and the card was like, we had to spend a day on the internet. We tagged white friends and said, please, can you be my my white ally or so? And the card says something like, before you interact dangerously with this Black body, please contact my white ally or whatever. And the person would sign the card and hand them. And we was like, this was an action that we did. And it was like one of the tips in the book, like, oh, always make sure you have your white ally to like back you up or something. We created Black Girl Magic Spray, which like spray away the patriarchy. We created broken glass, because he's like reverse broken glass theory was we could spread the broken glass in the neighborhood and gentrifiers would not want to move there. Right? And we made all this stuff real because then we was allowed in 2017 at Boston University to create an art exhibit where we like create prototypes out of the tips that we have made in our guide and book. So yeah, I'll not long my time. I'll stop there. That's just the example of some of the work we've done, but also going into the tradition that we look into, like using arts and activism, using arts to make your activism better, right? Like how can you do something when you want to attack narrative? It's best when it's not just a material thing you're trying to change, right? You're trying to change narrative, trying to change feelings and thoughts and all that. I think creative activism really hits at the heart of that. And I'll stop there.
Cool. I was gonna go maybe show some sort of historical examples and stuff, but this is something that we talk about in the workshops a lot, because when we talk about art and activism, a lot of people bring meanings to that. And so, you know, we have associations with activism, we have associations with art. And I was talking to somebody recently and they're like, yeah, art and activism actually never go together, which to me was just completely backwards, you know, like that they always go together. But I could see why they thought that, because we think about activism as sort of getting to concrete outcomes. It's about objectives. It's about things in the world that need changing. And so we think about activism leading to a direct effect, right? Most recently in this election, it's getting people to vote, you know, like there's a real thing in the world that needs to change. Where art is, you know, in some people's minds, I think internal, it's an exploration. There's not really an outcome. There's, you know, there may be, but it's about a process. And art isn't so much about outcomes as it is emotions and feeling, right? And affect. And when we say like, well, what did you like about a really great artwork? It's hard to describe. It's like, we say you had to be there, right? So, but we talk about affect, which is the combination of the two. And that's what artistic activism is. It's about using that emotional, the exploration, the process to get to a practical outcome. And it's helpful though, it's not one thing, it's kind of a spectrum. So if we think about affect being on one side and effect being on the other, I think it's actually easier to explain what this is by showing you things that are too far on one side or the other. So first we'll go to the affect side, and this is Richard Serra. He's this famous sculptor, and he's generally, if you ever see video of him, he's constantly drawing. Like he'll just be walking around in the world drawing all the time. And for him, drawing is a way of like sort of seeing and understanding the world for himself. And if you draw, you probably know this, or maybe there's a medium that it feels that way to you, right? So during the Iraq War and the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, he was really mad. And this is what he looks like when he's mad. And so he made this, oh, shoot. I just realized I screwed up this slide, but I'll describe it, then I'll show it to you. So he made this drawing, and it's of the sort of famous hooded person that's in the Abu Ghraib prison that's being tortured, and draws it in this really aggressive kind of way, right? With charcoal. And then you can tell he's angry, right? And just like he draws all the time, he's like figuring out how he feels about this. He's angry about what's going on, and he's making a drawing about that. And that idea of making art about a serious political issue, it needs to be done. I'm like glad that Richard Serra made that piece, but that's not artistic activism, because you can make art about anything. You can make art about the landscape, you can make art, any topic, right? It can be about political issues, but what we really want is to change the outcome. And so we call this, this is his drawing, is political expressionism, right? It's expressing ideas in an artistic way about politics, but it has no impact on power, no direct impact. Now, and I don't think that Richard Serra, when he made it, thought, when I make this, those congressmen and the senators are going to see this, and they're going to be so moved that everything will change, right? Like he's just drawing like he always does. So that's one side that I think is too far on the side of affect and emotion, right? On the other side is effect. And so this happens if you are an artist and you know people that are organized or organizers, it's probably happened to you, where they're planning an action and they say, hey, can you make us a poster? Or can you make us a website? Or can you, like, you know, the plan is made and they're like, can you bring some art and make some art about this? And this is what we call faux finish politics. And the image back here is of Picasso's Guernica, which is like the most famous political artwork, perhaps. And in addition to the anti-war signs and the other signs, people made this version of the painting, and they would hold it up on the sticks and then occasionally sort of come together and make the painting and then break apart. as far as protest signs go, it's great. And it includes all these artistic elements. It includes form and everything, but it's a layer on top. That's why we call it the faux finish thing, right? Like the plan, the march, all that is already decided. And then it's like, hey, can you put some color on top of this? Can you make this pretty? And that's not really using the skills of artists. That's not, artistic activism is about using creativity when it comes to the goals, the strategy, the objectives, like the whole thing. And the creativity comes out of that entire process, not adding art to politics, art to political action. So that's sort of how we think about that. And I'm going to show you guys an example just from the last couple weeks of work we did around the election. And then I'll just give you like it's a 2 or 3 minute summary of what we did, and then I might talk about it a little bit depending on how we're doing on time. So here's this.
Helping to get voters motivated and to the polls is a team of unconventional people that describes themselves as artistic activists, an 11-part series spread across the nation that informs voters by bringing the arts to the ballot box.
The neighborhood that we paraded through has a history of like lower voter turnout. It's so impactful to have someone come to your neighborhood with a big brass band and with clowns and say, we're throwing you a party. Let's go vote together.
You've got a ballad, let's sing a ballad. You gotta track it.
I need y'all to do me a favor. Three things. Find a song that motivates you to want to get out here and vote. The second thing, get up off your tail. Get out here and vote. Third thing, tell 3 people or drag 3 people with you. Get them to get out here with you. You know what I'm talking about? To get y'all early vote on.
Compton Cowboys riding their way to a ballot drop box at the Compton Library. They're taking part in the National Unstoppable Voters Project. It's a campaign aimed at targeting voter suppression.
Hey, we are outside a Trump rally here in Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump has been saying that he wants to stop counting votes here in Pennsylvania on election night.
So we talked to some Trump supporters to see if they agree with that or if they actually want every vote counted.
Basically, it's just saying that we want to count every single vote in Pennsylvania before victory is declared.
Sure. We know which candidate we're talking about is going to come in and try and steal this election.
If we don't count every vote, then it's not democracy, right?
Definitely.
Otherwise, it's a sham, right?
Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count them all! Count all the votes!
Those projects are intentionally like very accessible. My training is in the fine arts. You know, I can talk to you about things that are in museums and stuff, but that doesn't actually reach people. So that's why we're using things like circus performers and comedy, because it's really meant to be strategic, right? And we want to meet people where they are. We're using food trucks. We're using TikTok videos, right? Like this strategy that can reach as many people as possible and get them information that may be in some pamphlet put out by their Secretary of State or on a website by the Secretary of State, but to take that information and go where people are and present it in a way that they understand using the skills that we have. That's sort of our approach. So those are some examples from our side. Terry, there you are. Do you have another example, or do you think we should move forward? What do you think?
We can move forward.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to ask you all as we get into the sort of participation part of this is, what are you doing now that might be called activism? And this is the thing that you can write down. And if you want to throw it in the chat, I'm kind of curious to see what's there. And if you're not doing anything, don't feel guilty. That is not the point of this. But just make a note of what you're doing now. And once you have that, the next question is, what would be a stretch for you as far as like how activism and these things fit in your life? And Akila, you say we all have different definitions of activism. Absolutely. This is for you. So you can define it for yourself. So yeah, in your life, what are you doing, and what would be a stretch for you right now? And we're going to come back to this, so do write it down. And while you're writing that down, Akila, I'll just say, the different definitions. For me, part of the reason that I think I'm drawn to use the arts in activism is because I would not be good at some of the other things that are needed, like policy work, some of the research sometimes. Like, I'm so happy when I can find someone that can give me the analysis I need to do good work so I don't have to do it. And this is why we call it a movement, is that there are other people that you can work with and share those skills. So it is really important to think about how this fits in your life with the skills that you have. And in that way, it doesn't become it can become actually integrated into your life instead of feel like this extra thing that you have to do or you feel obligated to do. Okay, so let's keep going. You have that written down. And where we're going to go next is, okay, thinking about creative campaigns and joining creative campaigns. So one thing I want to say at the beginning, and Terry, feel free to jump in whenever, is that you already have the skills to be really great at this. Like, whatever got you to where you are now is all that you need, right? It's just figuring out how to apply some of those skills and find the places where it's a good match, and how to apply them in this other context. So the first thing I would suggest is, instead of thinking about how you can solve every problem or how overwhelming everything is just pick a few topics and then find a few organizations that you might be able to work with. And when you're thinking about collaborators and organizations to work with, and Terry, I'm curious how you would put this because you worked actually in a union, but choosing an organization to collaborate with is like choosing a therapist or like an exercise plan. You might try one or two and find out that it's not a good match for you, right? So like, go on dates, flirt, like meet with the organization, get a sense of like how they work, how you work, and see how you can collaborate. Terry, you got any insights on this?
I mean, that sounds perfect. I'll say for Intelligent Mischief, one thing coming from our experience, we've one of our criteria is that the organization has to be like bought in into this approach, and not. I know this isn't like for folks may not even have to work with organization or so, right? But for anyone, like this isn't like a there's a word we used to use, like I don't know, in a way like cure all, like oh even if you don't like it, it'll work. It's like actually believing in it is just a first step of like actually okay we're fully gonna use all the parts, right? We're gonna take one part and still do these other things. It's like no like let's roll with the belief.
I'm part of the union at my university, and one time they asked me to give a presentation and like, we like this part, but this part gets a little too strange. And I was like, nope, this is what I do, and you gotta trust me. And like knowing when to push like that is important.
Yep.
Yeah, and when we work with organizations, we'll try as much as we can to get leadership in the room. So that when the lower people in the hierarchy say, well, we could never do that, that the leadership person will be like, actually, you can, you know. Right. And so when you can get buy-in as high up as you can. But let's keep going. So next one is do some research on the topic. I think I've talked to people who are cautious or anxious about joining or helping an organization without fully knowing everything about the issue. And I think it's good to do some research where you aren't insulting them with your ignorance, but your fresh take is actually an advantage. And so when we work with in other countries, like I'll get a little bit of sense of the landscape, but I don't try to pretend that I don't try to learn everything about it. I don't pretend that I do. And that allows room for actual collaboration, right? Like you have this expertise about this local landscape, and I know these few things about arts and creativity and how that can apply to activism, and we have to work together because I don't know everything. What do you think, Terry?
Yeah, just simply like you don't have to be an expert on the issue in order to act on the issue. That's like, across the board organizing.
Yeah, and it's part of the collaboration. Is like the different kinds of expertise. This is a helpful one. It's getting them inspired. So, and I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Terry, is like you can show them other work that you've done or work that inspires you that you think might get them excited. Another thing I've done, I might have pictures of this. Let's see. No, get them out of the office. That's related. So often their office isn't the most inspiring place. Like I've worked with organizations where it's literally cubicles, and I kind of had a panic attack because I was like, I've worked for 20 years to get out of these kinds of spaces, you know, and now I'm back in one. So we would take everyone to a local restaurant and buy them food and then talk about ideas. But yeah, get them inspired, show them things that are kind of exciting, what might be possible. Be careful with examples because they'll often like cling to it and want to just say like, oh, we could do that, but with this, you know, and that's not really creative. That's just sort of substituting things in a recipe. But yeah, get them inspired about what's possible because they probably won't know the kinds of references that you know, and they won't know the kind of work that you do.
We I'll say in connected to that, one thing we've done was we found to like part of the inspiration, we often use like pop culture to just take people like out of the world, right? And so we had developed these series of workshops where we took the story world of Black Panther, Marvel, Disney, Black Panther, and we found a way like we put people through exercises where like first you know the story world of that if you see the movie or read the comics. Now place yourself there. Now how would your issue look like in Wakanda or so? And we actually just took people through a journey of actually thinking way beyond what they currently thought they could do if they thought they was in Wakanda, right? Because that's a certain type of utopia. So sometimes just taking people out of the actual real world and get into to imagine greater could come back and have real world results. Because then we come back and say, hey, how could you make that real? Similar to also C4AA does.
Yeah, yeah. And that's related to this next one, which is focusing on the outcomes you want. So what does this issue look like in Wakanda? If you go and say, what are you working on? People will often tell you about the method that they're using. You know, we're trying to get out voters for this upcoming election, instead of we're trying to win the election so that we can live in this world, or we can pass these policies. And as creative people, it's easier to think of more creative methods when you know what the outcome is. If they tell you about the method, it's harder to do. So, and this is helpful for them too, to like, a lot of times there's organizations that haven't stepped back and thought about outcomes in quite a while. Once you have that, outlining clear objectives, so steps that lead to those outcomes, it's clarifying for you, it's clarifying for them. And then another thing we do is teach about this truth about ideas, that it's about quantity of ideas more than quality, that quantity leads to quality. I'll be in meetings with groups and say, we'll come up with like the first idea, and they're like, we did it. We have a plan, you know. It's like, whoa, that's just one. We have to come up with more, and then we pick them, you know. And a lot of people that work in organizations or nonprofits or advocacy organizations like don't have that kind of creative process thing that is obvious to us, of generating a lot of ideas and sorting through them, and that is the creative process. They just think like, oh, you come up with an idea, right? Let's do a couple more and then we can get to the questions. How's that sound? Yeah. Use visual mock-ups. And so I have a couple examples. Like this is literally stick figures. This was for a project that I worked on with folks in South Africa. And this was a Photoshop mock-up that we made. And when I would show them these, like this thank you part got added afterwards, because when I showed them the first version, it didn't have it. And they're like, well, couldn't it close and say thank you? And I was like, yes. But they only could envision that once I showed them the stick figure drawing. And when I showed them this too, like this got all kinds of ideas flowing about getting, yeah, props and stuff that would sit on the table. So showing people pictures, especially, it's just helpful because they may not be able to envision what you're talking about. Terry, you look like you're about to say something.
No, that
okay.
was perfectly with it. We had, I was like, I totally messed up on a slide I had. we had actually hired an artist to visualize some of the tips before we made them into diegetic prototypes. So we had a tip that was like, keep as a tip for a Black person, keep your hands up at all times. And we just show like different is people taking a shower, trying to eat ice cream, you know,
right.
ridiculous things. And that's actually had got us sad. We actually made that tip before Mike Brown was killed. So none of our tips actually were coming to life in a sad way.
Well, I got perfect.
I was like, sorry for that down.
Yeah, we'll lead right into failure. So when you're collaborating, working with people that maybe not as familiar with creative processes, is anticipate failure, right? Have them expect that some of this stuff won't work out, and that's part of the plan. That's part of how creativity works. So what I usually do when I'm working with a like public health organization or something is like, we're going to come up with 12 projects and we're going to do all 12 of them. And I can tell you that 3 will probably work, and I don't know which 3. Mm-hmm. And this is how it works. Like it's going to be an experiment. And when they know that in advance, like they were so excited when more than 3 worked. I was too, but you know, like you kind of set reasonable expectations, and they understand, and then really celebrate the victories. I don't think I have to explain this one. And those are some tips. I want to move into the questions, but the one thing I'll just say before we do that is that you have many different skills. It takes a lot of different skills to do the kind of work that you do. And don't underestimate yourself. The things that make you a great artist or designer or manager, or able to manage your career, in whatever way that is working out, are the things that will make you a really successful artistic activist. There's not more that you need to know. It's just sort of, like I said, finding the right therapist or exercise program or diet or whatever. It's like trying it out, seeing what works for you and getting in there. So that said, I want to go back to our thing, which is what do you think a stretch would be for you now? Thinking about these things, and write that down. And then as you're writing that down, the last part is, what are you going to do tomorrow? So it's fine to write all this stuff down, but how can you kind of get started tomorrow? And I think from there we could, I don't want to rush you, but
Q&A.
Thank you, Steve and Terry. That was awesome, inspiring, and also tough work to think about some of these questions and get them out on paper. I'm going to drop the first question, and then I'm going to open it up to our community. I think, you know, for both of you and the type of work that you're doing, the idea of partnership and collaboration and choosing an existing group kind of goes without saying. And I think that there's this sort of also very, very American and very kind of unuseful concept of the activist as individual. And, you know, people who've been participating in things recently probably seen some of those tensions emerge in particularly the movement for Black Lives, where there's sort of like individuals at the forefront and movements that splinter and whatnot, or micro movements that splinter. I guess I'm curious, what kind of constitutes the right type of group? Like if you aren't working with the union or someone who's been around and is established, but if you're trying to work with smaller kind of grassroots or on the ground initiatives, can you kind of talk through the process of finding them and starting to communicate and, you know, be their peers as opposed to being their coach? Yeah, and Amelie, to clarify, I mean, right for you, right for whoever is trying to partner with them, that research piece that Steve was talking about. Yeah, right. And that, like, I couldn't tell you what you should work on, you know, I'll just trust that it'll be good. You know, I always think of the going it alone thing as being more on the art side, that activists understand working together and working in collaboration and having these, you know, departments and stuff. That my experience is being trained in the arts is this like soul, except in filmmaking, theater, music, the idea is that you're alone and away from the audience, and then you kind of deliver things. And that artists tend to go back to that of like, how can I do this as my project? Or I feel it all the time because of the training I have of the idea of authorship and credit, that I have to kind of fight back. And then also the guilt when things don't work, or that I'm not able to do more because like I'm supposed to do everything, instead of realizing like that it's a longer thing and that we do it in stages. Terry, what do you think?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's funny too, because I've a little bit come from the opposite end, because I very much consider myself like a byproduct of some institutions left over from the 60s. So long way of saying that from 1st to 8th grade, I went to Sister Clara Muhammad School, which was school set up by what was formerly known as Nation of Islam, which then became Orthodox Muslim. And the school I went to was founded by Malcolm X's sister in Boston. Right. So like this school, we used to watch Eyes on the Prize every year. Entire thing from 1st to 8th grade. I just thought everyone did that. So I was taught like a lot of activism, organizing, like around organizing, right? Like groups. So like I didn't have a conception of just going alone for a long time. I've actually probably had to learn a different thing, that like sometimes it's okay to do something Well, not by yourself or so, but definitely still like collaborating is the way to actually move masses of people, right? Um, yeah, like so. Yeah, I've always had like in learning history, you just learn like yeah, there's always like groups of people working together that make change. Something I would say like how do we for us it tells me like how we find the right group. We always found like groups we felt we was always so experimental. It was always groups that came to us, and so it was like we would just do work that we were doing, and people saw a reflection of themselves. So we started to notice at some point like the groups that actually hired us or would come to us were groups that like they had thrown away their blueprint. They was like, we're totally starting over, and we believe like something innovations needed or something. And they would come and find us. So one way is like to actually be a peer, actually just do your work and reflect out to people. It's a little different from recruiting in a way, or like going out to find. I'm not saying like that's bad, but there's also a way where you could like reflect, like do your work and have it reflect to attract. Yeah, a way to attract instead of go out.
Yeah. I'd also say going into an organization and just saying, hey, we're artists, this is what we do, we love what you do, or we're designers or whatever, and can you just tell us about it? Can you show us like what are you working on, like a studio visit, you know, and then say, man, it would be so great to work with you if you want to do that, and then like let's look for some way to make that happen, and sort of we'll look for grants, you look for grants, and just build that relationship, you know. We're trying to get, sorry, I'll stop in a soon, but we're trying to get organizations to create artist advisory councils, like, you know, our advisory board, where they would just go and talk to artists about whatever they're trying to work on in that, you know, public health context or whatever. And so that artists are around more to offer ideas, but also to set up collaborations. It's the thing we've been trying to create like a document about for a while.
Yeah, I think that speaks to there needs to be new structures actually in all this to accommodate these changes.
Yeah.
Love that. I want to call out Akila's question to Steve here around working with groups who have different lived experience. How do you understand them? How do you listen to them? How do you acquire contextual knowledge before going into whatever it is you're going to make or build with them?
This is a whole other hour. So part of it is the not like being really clear about what I do and don't know. And so to me, there's like when we would go to, we worked in Kenya, and there's a culture of teaching there where it's like you just, in certain schools, like we were working with people that had real higher education in that mix, right? And to do well in higher education, it seemed, from what I was told, that you kind of have to sit and listen, and then when you're asked a question, you repeat back what you were told, which for our style of teaching did not work at all. And so being really obvious about where the limits of my knowledge were, and kind of they would say, well, when this politician did this, I'd be like, I don't know who that is. Why don't you come up and tell, and then I would move to the back of the room and like, tell us about that, you know? So things like that, where because when we come as like or me alone as a white professor from New York City, all of those things bring this meaning and baggage that get in the way of us doing that work. So so as much as I can do to get them not seeing that part of it, and as soon as possible, is like, and we have these different techniques that we do around that, where within 10 or 15 minutes of us presenting, we're like at the back of the room and there's other people in front, things like that. A lot of it happens one-on-one. It's in the examples that we show. And then also we work with people for a while, right? Even in our workshops, it's like 5 days. So it's that amount of time to build a relationship and build trust. And we joke around a lot and we don't take ourselves super seriously, I think, which is also really important. It changes the dynamic of the relationship. But yeah, I don't know. I still think it's like an art form though, or it's a whole thing on its own. And so I hope that helps. But there's a lot to it. Yeah.
Pleased to hear that humor is part of that art form. Really happy about that. I'm not sure if you can see this question from Emily that I think I'd love to hear both of your takes on this around what constitutes an activist, and if you're not fitting the mold of a typical activist, right? What does that mean? What can you be? What can't you be?
Well, Terry, do you have something for this?
No, I mean, I'll say quickly because I feel like C4A has something very particular around it. But I mean, the question in particular, like, is I think anyone could be an activist. I don't think there's some barrier for anyone, not anyone being an activist. And if there's a question around like what's not fitting it, I think it's more like who's activists or not, but like what you're doing having impact or causing effect, right? Like that's more what it should be getting at, as opposed to like, or I imagine the question like, oh, what kind of style of activism are you doing, or what is effective? It's about, well, what's effective? Like what is effective? And I think it does get to a little bit in the C4A. It's like I effect. So did I say that?
Yeah. Right? Yeah, you did. The thing that has been bugging me lately is that why is it not art, right? Like as soon as art has an outcome, you get to question whether or not it's actually art, which to me is just very disempowering to people that make art. If you make art, it can't have any impact, or it can't have any real impact in the world, you know? This is a whole other thing, rant that I have, but and the definition of activists and stuff, and I think that's why we chose to make up our own term so that we could define it. And also I think that there's just this long-term, centuries-old idea of splitting art and activism, that they're separate practices, again, that always want to come back together. You can't keep them apart. It takes billions of dollars and staffs of institutions to like pretend that they're separate, but they just keep wanting to come back together. And so, yeah, the definitions to me are kind of more meant to disempower, to isolate, to and it doesn't benefit me to use them.
A follow-up I had in the chat was, how are we defining having effect, and who gets to define effectiveness? Because Terry, just hearing your answer, it makes me think that anyone can be an activist, and being an activist means that you can even impact people in the smallest ways. Like if you're impacting even just one person, it doesn't have to be an entire society, but even just one person could potentially have a powerful effect. So I'm just curious to know, what do we mean when we say having effect or effectiveness?
She invoked you.
I was like, she just happened.
I'm sorry, they
they just have to say my name. So, what you call it? Effect. I mean, I think that goes to scale, right? Because I mean, I think that's true. Like you have effect on one person, and that's tremendous. You know what I mean? Like, there's no downplaying that, right? And then it's like, well, what's the scale of the problem? What can we do? You know, and what's the goal? What's the scale and what's your goal, right? So maybe you as one person can't be like, yeah, I did this thing and I thought it would tear down the empire or something. I thought it would end all racism or misogyny or homophobia and all this stuff, right? And it's like, probably not. That hasn't happened. It hasn't been one person that's done all that, right? You probably need some other people. You need to learn some skills and technique, how to get the people who have the same idea. You get them all to believe that we could have actually a better future together, right? And then there's I think along the way, there's other measurements to find out if your goal is bigger, then your scale has to be bigger about that. And then it's figure out, and then it's like some of that is like, did someone's life change? Like, so that one person you could change life, and did you get something passed, a bill or something? I don't want to go to policy, but just as like an example, as I'm ranting, you know, like, oh, did this bill pass? Now these people can afford to take the bus fares cheaper or something, you know, all these different type of things. There's different measurements, and it's interesting because I think Steve Duncombe did a whole project of like how to measure artistic activism in particular, right? And I think some of that involves some also marketing, some typical marketing measuring skills as well. So there's also existing measurements that could be adapted for other purposes as well. Yeah, I think that's, I'll stop there. I was like, I think that's the best I can answer right now, to the best of my ability.
But the important thing is that you decide.
Right.
Right, you get to decide what effect means. So you can decide what is the outcome. You define it, right? The trick is that you don't delude yourself or delude yourself in being so ambitious, like I'm going to defeat everything, you know, or underestimate what you can do. And I think that happens more often, where it's like, all right, so I'm just going to try to do this one little thing. And it's like, well, okay, are we really being, is that all you can do? Are we being ambitious enough here? And so part of what we've done when we work with people is like, all right, let's figure out what you actually want, not what people have told you can and can't do, but what you really want. And then let's push that a little bit, you know, kind of like I was saying, like, what is activism for you? What would a stretch be? And yeah, and then you can decide too how you measure it. And that can be a look. It can be a gasp when someone encounters something. It can be like them not understanding it. That is a way of measuring it. If they're confused, that is a way of measuring certain things that don't necessarily line up with traditional metrics, but in this kind of work are just as valid.
Yeah, it's like, what's your goal? And yeah, therefore you get to set what's the measurements.
But I think rigor in coming up with those goals and those objectives, that's really key.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Hi. How do you ensure that the communities you serve are better off? Like, what are your better off measures? Like outside of what you want to achieve or what your intended outcomes are, like completely removing yourself from it because we're humans and there's like, you know, ego involved in this naturally. How do you measure that the people that you've, you know, affected are better off based on your efforts?
I'll go first on this one. So for the things that come to mind immediately, they're really concrete, right? So when we were working in the Balkans, there was a group that their kids went to the school and the road out front was full of these massive puddles, and they're like 6-year-old kids would come home wet and muddy because, and this is like a symptom of corruption in the city, right? So their intervention was to put rubber ducks in the puddles and then take pictures of them. And they had complained to the city about this over and over again. And once they put rubber ducks in it and that kind of took off and got covered by the press, so simple, right? The road was fixed within 3 days. And so it's really, you know, like they were trying to do this, they did it, the kids aren't muddy. Like it's, you can objectively measure it. And on a much bigger scale, when we worked with sex workers in South Africa, it was decriminalizing sex work. And they had real specific objectives that would change the lives of sex workers. And our job was just to sort of together move that forward. And so I think that's the value of having those clear objectives, is that it gives you a target to move towards. And that actually enables creativity when you don't have those. And it's like, how do we make these people's lives better? There's so many options and so many possibilities and opportunities that it can be kind of, it's hard to know which ones how to make strategic decisions, you know, about how to spend your time. So it kind of goes back to that, like, what's the effect you want? And I guess the other thing I'm not saying that maybe is obvious is that, like, they determined, like, you decide what the effect is. What are you trying to do? And that when we work with people, they're deciding the outcomes, you know? What do you think, Terry?
Nothing new. Like that, this is like the same exact answer. Yeah, cause I think sometimes people, especially like activists or people entering activism, like sometimes there's that thing like, say, how do we make these lives better? Or sometimes like, how can we end racism? How can we end capitalism or something like that, right? And that's like very big. You know, as you talk, I was already saying like, oh yeah, like what's your specific objectives? Like, and that's the same thing, like, what's your goal? What's your objectives? What's your, you then and the people you're trying to help and affect, or hopefully they're one and the same. Most often is most effective if they are one and the same, don't have to be, but you get to set like, have we achieved something, you know, is something better. There's
a tapping into the dream though, right? Like the Wakanda, what is the world in Wakanda?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. I'm not trying to bring it down to like a campaign. Look, you know, I could tell for Intelligent Mischief, we decided part of it creating Intelligent Mischief, right, was like, like you said, I worked at a union. I didn't even get my full history, right? I used to work for 1199 SCIU. I worked with different union groups throughout the group, also like grassroots community groups and stuff. And I just got tired of working in a framework of a specific campaign, right? That was very siloed, disconnected from other issues. The reason I want to go full-time in what is like creative activism is like this way of like having concrete results, but still in the realm of imagining greater, right? That's why we create projects where we worked, have people dream of Wakanda, like, can you make that dream real? Can we build our own story worlds, like expanding the imagination, right? You have to have the imagination in place at the same time as you're winning concrete things, because the imagination that goes longer allows you to get those real results, right? Without that large imagination, you're just gonna, you might get real results, but they're going to be smaller each time. The imagination allows you to get real results that get bigger and bigger and get closer to what you're imagining as well. Hope that makes sense.
That's great. I'm so grateful for these insights. I'm grateful for the synthesis that you're helping to put a fine point on, both of you, and for the time that we've had together tonight. Thank you so much for this. People who are less familiar with New Ink or newer to these types of conversations, we're going to have them once a month. Our next one is coming up on December 16th. We'll start making noise about it in early December, so keep an eye out for that. And hope you all have really restful rest of your days or evenings, or wherever you are, wherever you're calling from. And yeah, keep these conversations alive, keep it going. Round of applause virtually for Steve and Terry. Thank you so much.
I just want to say the level of attention in these questions, there's, you know, today was not the best day, but this like made it a little bit better. Not, you know, so thank you for that. And it's like nice to be reminded that people are thinking about this and care enough to spend this amount of time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for just allowing us to be here, share the space.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care. We will see you on the flip.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.